Well, we are back. Hello, everybody. It is July 22nd at, my computer says 6:58. So I just wanted to let everyone know that today, Scott typically tells what the weather is on his side. It is 81 degrees currently with a 69% humidity, which means it's real sticky outside. Tell us in the chat where you're joining us from. We're in Madison, Wisconsin, but we'd love to see where all of you are joining us from. We'll give it a couple more minutes until we get started. Yeah, big train news from Chicago Union Station today. That was fun. I don't know if anybody else saw that. Inga, did you see anything maybe?
I did see a little bit of train news from Chicago Union Station.
Wow, well, we'll have to see if, any other news comes up. Oh, we've got some great chat going on. This is wonderful. Oh, Virginia. Doug. Oh, I bet it's warm in Virginia too. Oh, we've got Orange County. I bet. I don't know. Is California hot today? Oh, hey, Rick Malo. Welcome from Texas. Dry
Ooh,
desert heat.
100
Yeah, I would
degrees.
take that over this humidity too, being an Arizona girl. Nice. Nice. Well, so great to see so many of you chiming in. This is wonderful. Oh, we got some people from New York coming in. Hello. Oh, Monterey. Elrond is telling us that it's 61 and sunny in Monterey. Little jealous. Little jealous. All right. It is 7 o'clock. Let's get this train a moving. All right. Okay. Let's see. Inga, can you see that?
Yes, I can.
All right, perfect. Well, again, welcome to everybody. We hope that it's a little bit cooler than it is in Madison, Wisconsin today, but we'll go ahead and get started. We are so grateful so many of you are able to join us. I wanted to start off with a little game tonight. Welcome to the Center for Railroad Photography and Arts online presentation for July 2025. My name is Lisa Hardy, and I'm the program administrator for the center. I think some of you might be really good at identifying photographs. And so I thought, well, let's maybe show a photograph and slowly reveal the entire photograph and see if any of you can guess where this location is. So let's start with the first reveal. All right, so we have a window. Anyone in the chat, can you guess where this is and maybe even the approximate date of the photograph? Could I push even further? Do you know the photographer? Okay, let's see. We'll give it a little bit. Can anyone guess based on this window? Inga, do
A
you see anything?
suggestion of Penn Station in 1940.
Oh, that's a good guess. Good guess. Let's show a little bit further. What do you think? Oh,
Already got
maybe,
John Collins saying something
maybe.
you might 1963, Chicago Union
Oh,
Station,
that's
John
a really good
Gruber,
guess. Really good guess. Maybe a
or
little bit
Union
the
Station
staircase.
from,
Would that be
let's see,
helpful?
from Rick,
Oh, we got some good guesses.
LAUPT from Richard Devine.
Oh, good guess. Good guess. Good guess. Any others?
Um,
Not yet. Okay, well, maybe it's time to show the full photograph then. Here we go. This is Chicago Union Station by Wallace W. Abbey, taken from the Canal Street stairway in the 1950s. So we
oh,
had some pretty good guesses there.
Gordon Yoricker, if I'm spelling or saying your name right, you're the big winner.
Awesome. We'll send you some rail points for sure. Fantastic. So sticking with the Union Station theme, here's a photograph by Center's founder, John Gruber, from 60 years ago. Passengers and employees on a platform at Union Station. Now stick with me here. We've got a theme going. Here we see two Amtrak passenger trains at Chicago Union Station on July 4th, 1971. You may be asking Lisa, why so many photographs of Union Station? At the center, we are celebrating the 100th anniversary of Union Station, which officially opened 100 years ago on May 16th, 1925. According to the Chicago Public Library, the centralized terminal was part of architect Daniel Burnham's 1909 plan of Chicago. Sadly, Burnham died in 1912 and never got to see the station in its finished form, as it took more than a decade to construct at a cost of approximately $75 million. Cheers to you, Chicago Union Station, and a very happy 100th. Earlier today, our executive director, Scott Lotus, spoke at a ceremony commemorating this anniversary at Chicago Union Station with many other special guests. Amtrak also invited the center to help them celebrate this anniversary by using photographs from our collection that were printed on very large banners seen here in the Great Hall. But that's not all. A slideshow of historic photography is playing in the Metropolitan Lounge for Amtrak sleeping cars. What an absolute privilege for the center. We are very grateful to Amtrak for partnering with us to celebrate. More information about Chicago Union Station can be found at www.chicagounionstation.com and also on our website at www.relphoto-art.org/CUS100. Interestingly enough, we featured Chicago Union Station in our summer 2025 edition of Railroad Heritage. I suggest reading the article called A City of a Station, which includes a striking black and white photographic essay celebrating Chicago Union Station's centennial year, featuring images from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Thrill to classic scenes are included in and around the station, with trains from the Pennsylvania Railroad, Burlington, Milwaukee Road, Amtrak, and more. In-depth portrayals by John Gruber and Wallace Abbey, with additional images by Jim Shaughnessy and Victor Hand, plus an essay by Scott Lotus, make this article a must-see and read. If you'd like to purchase a copy, you can visit our website at www.railphoto-art.org/RH2025-3. While on that topic, I saw that some of you are first-timers joining us tonight. Allow me to introduce the center. The Center for Railroad Photography and Art is a nonprofit arts and education organization. We fulfill our mission through a number of programs that include online programs like tonight, our annual conference, traveling exhibitions, an annual photography competition named for our founder, John Gruber, various publications including our quarterly journal, Railroad Heritage, and our Railroad Heritage Visual Archive that can be found at www.railphoto-art.org/collections. Our members' fuel are the fuel for all of these programs. Thank you so much for your incredible support. If you aren't a member, I encourage you to go to www.railphoto-art.org/support to become a member today. Membership includes access to our members-only online programs, discounted rates for our annual conference, and a subscription to our quarterly journal. We are thrilled to announce our latest publication, the Kalmbach Art Collection, Pairing Words and Imagery, is available for purchase on our website at www.railphoto-art.org/books. This book is filled with the 53 paintings and drawings that comprise the center's newest exhibition, currently on display at the Grohmann Art Museum in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Due to the popularity of this exhibition, the Grohmann Museum has extended this exhibition to run through September 14th, 2025. If you're going to Milwaukee, we highly encourage you to visit the Grohmann to see this exhibition. If you can't make it to see the exhibition in person, this full-color softcover book will give you a chance to see the artwork and read more about the artwork's fascinating history. Our esteemed presenter tonight, Kevin Keefe, wrote the lead essay for this book, which is filled with stories that Kevin is uniquely able to tell. Buy your copy today. A quick reminder that we love seeing your comments. Use the chat icons shown here to chime in with your comments. If you have a question during the presentation, please use the Q&A icon to submit your question. We will be hosting a short Q&A to follow this presentation with presenter Kevin Keefe. If you have a question at any point during tonight's presentation, make sure to post it in the Q&A, not the chat, to ensure that we see it. All right, let's get to the main event for this evening. I have had the opportunity to get to know Kevin over the past year and found him to be one of the warmest, kindest, amusing, and interesting people I've ever met. He is a wealth of information and wisdom. As part of my efforts with the Kalmbach Art Collection exhibition, Kevin became an invaluable resource for research and agreed to be interviewed and share his thoughts about the collection. I was terrified because while I've interviewed many people in the past, I have never interviewed a journalist and former editor. How do you prepare to interview someone like Kevin Keefe? I think Kevin knew exactly what I needed, and he probably didn't even realize it. He suggested we go to lunch prior to the interview. Over the meal, Kevin and I fell into a comfortable conversation and connected over our shared love of music. Kevin has a way of putting others at ease by asking questions that aren't intimidating, actively listening, and allowing space for natural conversation to take place. I wish everyone could have the opportunity to have lunch with Kevin. It put me at such ease that when we sat down later for the interview, I wasn't nervous at all. Lesson learned: go to lunch with Kevin before doing something terrifying. He'll put you at ease, I promise. Kevin P. Keefe was born in Chicago in 1951 and graduated from Michigan State University School of Journalism in 1973. At MSU, he was a key figure in the effort to restore Père Marquette steam locomotive number 1225, and his 2016 book for MSU Press, 1225: The Life and Times of a Steam Locomotive, won the Library of Michigan's prestigious Notable Books Award. In recent years, he collaborated on books about photographers Jim Shaughnessy, Wallace W. Abbey, and J. Parker Lamb. He has worked for daily newspapers in Wisconsin and Michigan, and as an associate editor and editor-in-chief from 1992 to 2000 of Trains magazine. He retired in 2016 as Kalmbach Media's vice president editorial after 29 years with the company. Kevin, I turn it over to you, unless you need to go to lunch first. Just kidding.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Lisa. I'm not sure I know who that guy is you're talking about.
He's a great one.
Okay, well, I'd like to meet him someday. How about that?
Okay. Looks good, Kevin.
And the screen looks fine now?
Sure does.
We're up and running. Okay, well, it's a pleasure to be here tonight. This is a version of the presentation I did a few weeks ago at the Grohmann Museum, which is a fabulous museum in Milwaukee. It's a really serious museum of industrial art, and anybody would enjoy visiting there. But I've expanded it with some other stuff, some other images, some other backstories about some of the people involved in Kalmbach. So that's what we'll get into here. The locus of creativity, the Kalmbach offices at 1027 North 7th Street. And the reason I'm doing this is because 90% of what you're going to see here involves this building here, not the one that many of us know from the latter 30 years of the company's history out in Brookfield, Wisconsin, or Waukesha, depending on how you define our address. Most all this was happening here. This is back when the Kalmbach Art Department was creating so much original art. The building was built in the 1920s, and Kalmbach moved here in the middle of World War II and stayed until 1988 or 1999. So we were here for 1989. So we were here for about a good 45 years before we moved out to the suburbs. And I worked in this wonderful old crazy building for several years. And up on the 6th floor, here we see the art department. And this was a great art department. It looks pretty buttoned up. All those guys in their white shirts and their ties, with one young woman in the foreground. But it wasn't as buttoned up as it looked. There were a lot of really fun people in the art department and terribly creative. On the left, you see Gil Reed working at his desk. Right over the little wall ahead of him is Laverne or Vern Blyfus, who many of you will know from the masthead for years in Trains. Behind them, looking over his shoulder, is George Gloff, the corporate art director, and he's looking over the shoulder of Bob Wegner, our map maker extraordinaire for 40 plus years. And in the far corner is artist John Swatsley, who was only in the Kalmbach employment for a few years, but we'll hear a lot more about him later in the program. And I think I tracked down the name of the young woman in the foreground. I don't know her name, but I think her initials were K.M. Duffy. I found that on an old Trains masthead today. So there's your art department. I think it's notable that everybody's got their sleeves rolled up because Kalmbach in those days had no air conditioning. And the art department was a difficult place to work because when it got hot and sticky, all those drafting sheets would stick to their arms. It was a common complaint. I'm going to start out by talking about George Gloff, the corporate art director. He was a longtime employee of Kalmbach and a significant railroad artist in his own right. Here's a couple of photographs of George as I knew him. On the left is a photograph I took of George in June 1975 when we had a reunion of Dave Morgan and photographer Philip Hastings at the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom. That's a nice shot of George. And on the right is George in the vestibule of what I think is a Southern steam excursion with Morgan. And George and David were longtime traveling companions and very close friends, as we'll hear more about later. Wanted to explain a little bit about George's background. As I understand it, he grew up in Milwaukee, and he went to school here at the Leighton School of Art. And I say the late lamented Leighton School of Art because among the many architectural atrocities in any American city, Milwaukee has a few of them of its own. And one was the demolition of this building in 1957. The good news was that the Leighton School of Art did provide a key building block in the formation of what we know today as the world famous Milwaukee Art Museum. And for those of you who've been to Milwaukee who might wonder where this was at the corner of Mason Street and Jefferson. And it's now a big parking structure. But if you look way over there in the left-hand corner above the roof, you can see the spire from St. John's Cathedral, the headquarters of the Milwaukee Archdiocese. And here is what the Milwaukee Art Museum looks like today. Opened in 2001 and designed by the famed Spanish architect Santiago Calatrava, who also designed a lot of wonderful buildings. You can Google him and see all kinds of stuff around the world. Excuse me. Pardon me. A note about this building, the chairman or the head of the whole effort to have this pavilion built for the Art Museum is a member of our board of directors, the retired Milwaukee architect David Kaler. The other reason I wanted to include this picture of the current Milwaukee Art Museum is I was in there a few years ago, and I was drawn over to a corner of the atrium where there was a small marble panel with the names carved in it of people who'd given more than $1 million to the art museum. And in there, one of the new names that had just been added, which was George Gloff, which just really flipped me out. That's what George left after his passing to the art museum, which is obviously a wonderful gift. Here's another little detail about George that you might want to know about. On September 2nd, 1950, Kalmbach co-sponsored the national convention of the National Model Railroad Association, NMRA, convention in Milwaukee. And as part of the convention, there was a special trip organized on the last little vestige of the Milwaukee Electric Transit System, a company called Speed Rail. And that day, over on the southwest side near Cleveland Avenue, near what is now Interstate 894, there was a terrible head-on crash involving a regularly scheduled train and the excursion train, which was in the lightweight cars on the left. And George Gloff, God bless him, was on that train. In fact, he was on the payroll in those days of Speed Rail as a graphic artist. And George told me about it years later. He didn't mind talking about it, but he jumped at the last second and saved his life. And I think it was either his arm or his leg. He broke a bone when he jumped. Sad to say, 10 people died in this crash and 45 were injured. And not long thereafter, Speed Rail went out of business. So we're leading up to some really wonderful art by George. In 1965, April, Morgan was planning a special big story that he did on the current state of the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad. Morgan went out to Denver, interviewed executives, traveled a little bit around the railroad, and did this big story. And for whatever reason, rather than illustrate it with a lot of photographs, they decided to go with original art done by George. Here's the cover. You'll see this photograph in a couple moments in a different guise. George was, I'm guessing here, casting about for what would be a good subject. And one of the things he decided to include was a Denver and Rio Grande Western GP30 locomotive, probably because it was a new locomotive at that time, fairly new, and it looked really cool, and it was really popular with rail fans. So he consulted the Kalmbach picture files, found some pictures of GP30s, and he also had a lot of photos like this, which was the cover photo, incidentally, of that issue, by Dick Steinheimer, showing a Rio Grande train nosing its way through the Royal Gorge in March 1964. And this is the two of the three pieces of art that George came up with for the story, which I absolutely love. It's a great showcase for George's rather impressionistic, offhanded sort of way of depicting railroading, which was as much emotion as it was technical skill. You see the GP30 on the left working its way through a canyon, and on the right, a more of an industrial scene at a railroad yard as the California Zephyr passes through in the evening. And if anybody in the comments can tell us where these locations are, I'd love to know that, because there were no captions, no location captions included with the artwork. But this is what George was capable of. But he did a lot more wonderful things, and I wanted to throw in one more. This was Glof's vision of the Pennsylvania Railroad from the March 1990 issue of Trains. And Morgan wrote beautifully about it. He wrote a short 250-word essay to go with this wonderful painting. I did not know about this painting. Dave Ingalls did, and I was working on Trains in those days. So Dave scheduled this for the March 90 issue, which coincidentally and sadly turned out to be the issue where we ran the obituary for David P. Morgan. But there was this essay by Morgan in that issue, kind of a bittersweet thing. And in there he wrote, "The artist can shrug off the limitations of the lens, even of the eye, and record what intrigues the mind and the imagination." And I think that really sums up George Glof's approach to railroad art. He was not for rivet counters. He was for people who wanted to get an emotional reaction to railroading. We're going to move on now and talk about another key member of the art staff in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, and that's Alan J. Brewster. With blueprints, pens, and airbrush, he raised technical drawings to the level of fine art, which we can attest to because one of his most beautiful works is now in our collection. Here's a photo of Alan Brewster at work in the art department downtown, probably in the mid-80s. And he died, I'm sad to report, in 2002 at a relatively young age, 67. He'd been the recipient of a heart transplant in 2001 and had two separate stints in the KPC art department. He was a determined worker, a real sweetheart, and just a really wonderful guy to know. He didn't like a lot of pressure, which led him to leave the company for a while, but he did some great work for us, including what you're about to see on the Fairbanks Morse Trainmaster, which was a famous fleet of diesel locomotives constructed by Fairbanks Morse in the mid-1950s. Fairbanks Morse being a company based in Beloit, Wisconsin. The Trainmaster was, at the time, I think I read, was the most powerful diesel locomotive at that moment. 2,400 horsepower dual service locomotive. It could be used both in passenger service and freight. And it's probably its most famous application was on the Southern Pacific here in commuter service out of San Francisco. By the mid 70s, these engines were still hanging on the SP, and that drew a lot of photographers, including this very haunting photograph from Kyle Bream, which he got in March 1975, not long probably before these engines were retired, at Bayshore Yard on San Francisco Bay. Alan also had other materials to consult in the Kalmbach library to do his work. And one of them I discovered recently was this terrific booklet that Fairbanks Morse published in 1952, talking all about the Trainmaster, its advantages, its technology, its specifications, all that sort of thing. So Alan put all this stuff together, and what metamorphosed out of that was this fantastic cutaway of the Trainmaster from the August 73 issue of Trains, accompanied by a long and very detailed story by my former boss, J. David Ingalls. It's a wonderful piece of art. It's more than just a technical drawing. There's a lot of stuff in here that could only have been done by an artist who really knew what he was looking at, who really understood railroading, and in this case, understood the SP paint scheme, and understood what to emphasize in the cutaway and what not to. And this is a very precious painting for us to have in our collection today. Now we're going to move on to another terrific member of the art staff, who was a friend of mine for many years, and that's Lawrence Larry Lusser, pronounced Lusser like L-U-S-S-E-R. Of all the art department employees in the 70s and 80s, I thought Larry was closest to the cutting edge of design. And sure enough, he was also, I think more than anybody else in the art department, active in the Milwaukee graphic arts scene, and he was a member of the Milwaukee Ad Club. Milwaukee has probably a bigger advertising community than people outside of the area would realize. Here's a photograph of Larry in the 1980s at his drawing desk downtown, still downtown. This is after 1975 when the building was air conditioned and modernized, but it's still downtown. And Larry always looked really spiffy at work. He was mainly designing books for us. And that led him to this assignment to do, I think, the most important book Kalmbach Books ever published. And that was the famous book, The Mohawk That Refused to Abdicate and Other Tales by David P. Morgan with photographs by Philip R. Hastings. And this was the great compilation of trips that Morgan and Hastings took in the mid-1950s to chase the last steam engines in America, or at least many of the last steam engines in America. And I think the heroism of the book is reflected very much in this fabulous photograph by Phil of New York Central engineer John Hitchcoe leaning out the cab window of a battered old, wasn't that old actually, but a battered New York Central 482 Mohawk engine 3005, hence the title of the book, The Mohawk That Refused to Abdicate. That day, Philip and David encountered this guy and his engine somewhere in Ohio and saw it for a few minutes, got some pictures, and didn't think they would see it again. But later in the day, they were in Shelby, Ohio, and sure enough, old John Hitchcoe and his old steam engine caught up with them in this thunderous display in the fading light. It's amazing that Phil got as much as he did out of this picture because it was pretty late in the day. And the essay that Morgan wrote for this part of the book was really stirring. And as he famously said, the train approached the photography with all the implications of the book of Revelations. And a shout out to my friend Greg McDonald for a really nice, crisp scan of this particular photograph. So what Larry decided to do, not always with our approval in the marketing department, because in those days I was working in the sales department as the ad copywriter and promotional manager. He was determined to get the Mohawk on the cover, which we all supported. I sort of felt that we should try and use one of Philip's photographs, like a lot of art books were doing in those days with black and white photography. But Larry went in another direction, which I ended up respecting very much. And he created this wonderful ink drawing of the 3005 bearing down on the viewer in a cloud of smoke. And over in the right-hand corner where the smoke meets the horizon, you can see Larry's signature. And the reason he created this ink drawing was to be used in a very special ID he had for the dust jacket, which was this, to me, which is pure 1970s. I'm not sure the design has aged well, but all of us who love the book will always hold this cover dear to our hearts. There's the drawing that he created on the cover with a lot of 70s typography, and it was printed on a foil dust jacket. I'm not sure why Larry chose foil. Morgan went along with it, so who were we to argue? And that was the famous cover. It's a great cover, but it doesn't wear well. It's easily scuffed up, but it still is a memorable piece of work by Larry. Next person I want to talk a little bit about is John Swatsley, whom I never knew when I worked there. He worked at Kalmbach in the 60s and left, and I didn't catch up with him, but I got to admire his work as a teenager very much, and later on when he started doing a few more things in the 70s. He went on to worldwide acclaim as a wildlife artist. This is a picture of John today at home, I believe in Connecticut. And he was a great guy because I chose John to do a cover for us in 1990, or in 2000, excuse me, when we did a special cover story I'll tell you more about in a second. Meanwhile, here are examples of Swatsley's vision of wildlife. He's very famous for this kind of thing. And in here, I have a quote somewhere about how someone described his approach. In his art, you will sense something of the mystery one feels when alone in a quiet corner of creation. John makes regular trips to Africa to do research on wildlife and brush up on his subjects before he does his paintings. But he's never lost the knack for doing railroad stuff, as this painting proves. Steel Mill Switcher, an oil painting by Swatsley. I don't know when this was done, but it was done in the last 20 years or so, I'm guessing. I love this almost impressionistic approach. I love the fact that it isn't hounded down by all kinds of detail. It's simply conveying an emotional, beautifully visual reaction to steam in action. And he's depicting here an 080 switcher at the Northwestern Steel and Wire Company in Illinois, Sterling, Illinois. Sorry. So what did we use John for? Well, I called John. I managed to track him down and said, would you be willing to do a cover painting for us for the April 2000 issue of Trains, in which we were going to feature a story about John Luther Casey Jones, the famous engineer. Here's a photograph of Casey Jones taken in Jackson, Tennessee. He was killed in the line of duty in 1900, running a train on the Illinois Central at April 30th, 1900 at Vaughn, Mississippi. Here's a picture of Casey at the throttle of a 280, not the locomotive he was famous for running in the crash, but that's the man right there earlier on, taken somewhere on the IC, probably near Jackson, Tennessee, which is the terminal where he was based. Here's the engine Casey was running that fateful night in April 1900 when he crashed. The 10-wheeler, a very fast 10-wheeler, number 382. And the notation on the back of the picture tells me that this is a photograph of the engine after it was rebuilt following the wreck. And then here's a photo of Casey Jones's memorial at his gravesite in Jackson, Tennessee. It's a big deal down there. Casey Jones was a famous person in American folklore. After the turn of the century, several songs were written about him, lots of articles in magazines, and he became famous for staying on his locomotive even when it was certainly going to crash into the rear end of a freight train that was fouling the main line. He had his fireman, Sim Webb, jump to his safety, but Casey stayed with the engine. And the quote here, I'm certain is fictional, but it says on the gravestone, "For I'm going to run her till she leaves the rail or make it on time with the southbound mail." So here is the painting that John came up with for our cover, and I was thrilled to get it when it finally arrived. Oil on Masonite, April 30th, 1900 is the title. And I want to make a special mention of John too. John cut us a real deal on this. My manuscript budget in those days was such that I could only afford so much for something like original art. And John gave us a nice deal on this painting. And here's what it looks like in the final iteration on the cover of the April 2000 issue. 100 years ago, Casey Jones' last ride. And I'd like to mention also that some of my friends advised against doing this story. It had been done to death, a lot of them said, and certainly Casey Jones was covered over and over and over in books and encyclopedias and in song and everything else. But we had a wonderful writer working for us in those days, the late Pete Hansen, and Pete was one of the best historical journalists I've ever run across, and he did a wonderful story that kind of recreated the whole Casey Jones experience afresh. So John did a great job. More from Swatsley. Here's another cover just to show the versatility of John. This was from the March 1965 issue, just a couple of months before I began reading Trains at age 14. This was probably not a favorite cover on the part of readers. It depicted what was called the integral train, which was a train technology that was really pushed by Trains' famous columnist of that era named John Nealing. And Morgan kind of signed on to the idea, at least in principle, of the integral train, and gave Nealing a lot of space in the magazine in the March issue and put this on the cover. Now, in those days, Al Kalmbach, the publisher, didn't have the money, he felt, to really run color on the cover very much, so it ran in black and white, and really wasn't a cover that would have quickened my pulse. But you should also see what the finished painting looks like. It's really quite nice, and it's now in the Center's collection. Swatsley's integral trains concept in full color. Now I'm going to talk about Gil Reed and Ted Rose, a couple of good friends of mine. They were good friends with each other, colleagues at Kalmbach briefly around 1960, and titans in the world of railroad art. Here is a wonderful photo that the Center found for me of Gil on the right and Ted on the left together at the at an NRHS convention in Chicago in the early 90s. And it's such a characteristic pose of both guys, smiling. They were big kidders. They had great senses of humor. which is borne out by the two name tags they're each wearing. Gil Reed's name tag says quite clearly, "I'm not Ted Rose." And Ted's, of course, says, "I'm not Gil Reed." And they used to tease each other a lot about their approach to railroad art. And it could be pretty merciless, but it was also terribly funny. So we'll start with Ted. Unbeknownst to Dave Ingalls and I, after Morgan died in January 1990, Ted decided to do a painting in tribute to David. At least I didn't know about it, and I don't think Ingalls knew about it either. And what he decided to do was a mashup painting from two images of Morgan's trips with Phil Hastings. And the first one was this one, this fabulous photograph that Phil took while David and he were chasing a New York Central train west out of Mattoon, Illinois in, I think, 1954. What a great photograph by Phil. You can see the engineer's silhouette on the right side of the cab. He's hooking up the engine to go even faster. The fireman's watching his gauges. The engine's getting close to doing 79 miles an hour. And Morgan famously wrote in his essay that the steam engine left Morgan's Ford in the dust. The other part of the painting would come from this photograph, showing David in his characteristic slouch, leaning up against his Ford sedan in northern Ohio as a New York Central Niagara passes with an express train, also from the Mohawk series. And together, this is what Ted came up with. Only Yesterday was the title of the painting, and it's a wonderful painting and a precious part of the collection. I remember the day it showed up. I think we probably knew Ted was up to something, but we didn't know what. We'd invited him to participate in the November 1990 issue of Trains, which was the big 50th anniversary for the magazine, and certainly one of Dave Ingalls' finest hours as editor. Finally, one day, we'd invited Ted to be part of it. So finally, one day, this package, probably from UPS, showed up, big package, and we opened it up, and my goodness, there was this fantastic painting that Ted had done just for us, just for that issue, depicting our recently departed good friend and colleague, David P. Morgan. Now I'm going to move on to a couple of things that Gil did. And I'm going to talk first off about the dust jacket that Gil did for a really landmark book called The Nickel Plate Story, which came out about 1965 by author John A. Rehor, R-E-H-O-R. And in deciding on the subject for the cover, well, that was clear from the beginning. I'm sure that Gil knew, and I'm imagining this, but I'm sure Gil knew, and Rehor probably insisted, that a nickel plate Berkshire be on the cover. The nickel plate had 80 of these Berkshire type 284 steam locomotives, which were extremely effective and efficient fast freight engines that really revolutionized the fortunes of the nickel plate during the late 1930s into the late 1950s. And I couldn't help but wonder why Gil chose number 765 to be the engine on the cover. Well, it turns out if you leaf through the nickel plate files in the train's library, there's lots of pictures that pop up with 765. I don't know why that is so much. Maybe it's just coincidence, although I also understand from some friends of mine that the 765 was a particularly popular engine. In other words, it ran well. Fans of steam know that steam locomotives were persnickety. They weren't like stamping out automobiles on an assembly line. Each one was handmade, and each one had its own quirks. Apparently, the 765 was relatively quirk-free. You could ask the folks in Fort Wayne if that's true. Here's the 765 crossing the Chesapeake and Ohio Diamonds at Fostoria, Ohio in July 1950. Another shot that Gil may have consulted is by the author of the book himself, John Rehor. This is 765 departing Bellevue, Ohio in August 1956, near the end of its career. Notice the different way that the front end of the engine looks, which nickel plate changed over the years. Here, the headlights in the middle, there's no red Mars light. And in this picture, the smoke box has become a little bit more cluttered. Still very cool. And then there's these two photographs that I'm almost certain that Gil consulted for his painting. They're both taken by Richard J. Cook, who's one of my favorite photographers. He famously did a book called Rails Across the Midlands in the 1960s that was a Golden West photo book about Dick Cook's adventures in steam across the Midwest. Here's a fantastic picture of the 765 about to take on coal at Bellevue, Ohio in 1949. And I love the nickel plate road sign built into the masonry of the smokestack on the right. And another shot, and this is my favorite shot of all of them. This is 765 on a reefer train coming out of Bellevue, Ohio, again by the great Richard J. Cook. So I can't help but add this photograph. Oh no, we'll get to that in a moment. Here's the painting that Gil did, showing the 765 at night with a crew talking, the engineer in his overalls, and I'm not sure if that would be the conductor he's talking to, but somebody else. Nice glow coming from the cab. And you can see a hint of the coaling tower in the background. This is probably intended to be at Bellevue, Ohio again. But it was a wonderful painting, and it wrapped around the cover, actually. As you can see here, the 765 was featured prominently on the front of the book. And then to see the other engine, the rest of the engine, you'd have to look around the back. But once again, this is a wonderful painting, and we're so proud to have it in the collection. I remember it spent the last 20 years at Kalmbach on the hallway right outside the lunchroom, whatever that means. And then I wanted to throw this in there just because I took it a week ago. Here's 765. Some of the audience might not know this, but 765 is very much alive today, running for the Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society. And it's running all summer long on the Indiana and Northeastern Railroad. And this was during the NRHS National Convention last weekend out of East Lansing, Michigan. And here it's arriving in Hillsdale, Michigan, I think it was Monday, I believe. And I was out there with Steve Barry and a bunch of other guys chasing this. It was a wonderful day. And the engine, like everything Fort Wayne does, it just looks smashing. On to another Gil Reed painting. This was for another one of Kalmbach's most famous books, and quite possibly its biggest seller, The Hiawatha Story by Jim Scribbins. And for this cover, well, the book, I should say what the book was about at first. The book was all about the Hiawatha fleet of passenger trains that the Milwaukee Road operated in the 1930s into the late 1960s, early 70s. They were highly competitive passenger trains running in the Chicago, Milwaukee, Twin Cities corridor, competing with both the Chicago and Northwestern's 400 fleet and with the Burlington's Zephyr fleet. And the Milwaukee Road had made a particularly big splash with the whole notion of speed. And it did that partly by choosing to buy 442 Atlantic type steam engines to debut the service. Now, by 1935, the 442 was probably mainly an obsolete type of engine because it couldn't pull a lot of tonnage, but it could go like hell. And here's a photograph of the newly arrived number 3 at the Milwaukee shops in downtown Milwaukee. You can see in the background those giant high tension towers. They not only are supporting high tension wires for power purposes, but below them is the right of way of the Milwaukee Electric's rapid transit line. Here's another photograph of a sister engine, number 2, taken closer to Chicago in 1935, showing off not only the locomotive, but the way it was integrated with the whole train in brilliant maroon and orange colors. For the cover, Gil wanted to convey speed, and the best place to do that would be to have a painting centered at Rondout, Illinois, which is where the Milwaukee Road crossed the Elgin, Joliet, and Eastern line, and then coincidentally, the North Shore Electric went overhead. Famously, the speed limit for much of the run between Milwaukee and Chicago for the Hiawathas was 100 miles an hour. But because the Milwaukee Road main had to cross the EJ&E here, the engineers were under strict instructions, now get this, to slow down to 90 miles an hour, which is 10 miles an hour faster than Amtrak goes today. Anyway, I included this because this is a successor engine to the A-class Atlantics we saw a moment ago. It's an F-class 464 going so fast that it's blurring the film of photographer Frank Sellers at Rondout a couple of years after it was introduced. But it gives you an idea of just how fast the Milwaukee Road ran its trains. Here's another shot of number 3, 15 years later when it was down on its heels and just before it was retired. It looks a little beat up, but it's still, you can tell, going like a bat out of hell as it approaches Rondout on an unnamed train. And here is a sad picture I just couldn't help but include. Here's the Atlantic. I can't quite, oh, it's number one. This is one of the four. Getting ready to go off to the scrapper. Again, it's photographed down at the Milwaukee shops in Milwaukee. You can see the Milwaukee Electric Rapid Transit Tower in the background. And in the foreground is one of the Atlantics that's headed for its doom. And it's an interesting photo of an engine about to be scrapped, but it's also interesting because of the people involved. If you look in the gangway of the all-weather cab, that's Dave Morgan in his trademark trench coat talking to someone inside the cab of the engine. And over on the left, you see two other guys. I'm not sure who the taller one is, but I know who the shorter one is, and that's Al Kalmbach himself. Clearly, the guys at work had taken an hour or so to skip work and go down here and see these things before they headed off to the scrapper. And here's the way Gill's painting showed up on the cover of the Hiawatha Story. This is the copy, the very same copy that's in the Kalmbach, well, not in Kalmbach, but in the Fire Crown Media Trains magazine library today. A little beat up, but that's the original from 1970. And here's the actual painting as it now appears in the collection of the Center for Railroad Photography and Art. It's a big painting. It used to hang outside my office for 8 or 9 years, and I saw it every day and I loved it. I love seeing it every day. And it's it's a great piece by Gill. Not only is it a nice painting of this particular engine and this particular train, but it also displays a characteristic I thought was so true of Gill, and that is a certain joy or exuberance that he had for the subject matter. Gill was a cheerful guy, and always upbeat and always excited about doing whatever he did, no matter what the assignment was. And I think that comes across in this fantastic painting. And finally, I wanted to run this photograph here showing the crew, many of which were from the art department, on the day that a big boy, 4017, was donated to the National Railroad Museum in Green Bay. And obviously, the big boy made a stop in Milwaukee on its way to Green Bay. And characteristic of working at Kalmbach in those days, if something cool was happening on the railroad and you wanted to go, drop everything and go. And that's probably what was happening here. On your left, I don't know who the young fella is on the far left, but I can tell you the guy next to him in the trench coat is the great Gordy Odegaard, who was a longtime editor at Model Railroader and the company's leading prankster. Next to him, you can just see his face with a beaming smile, is Vern Blyfus, a longtime staff artist at Kalmbach. Next to him, wearing a raincoat, is the great Rosemary Entringer, longtime managing editor of Trains magazine. She died in 1977. Next to her, just visible in his face, is Bob Wegner, our great map maker. I believe the guy in the white coat next to him, the younger guy, is Charlie Kalmbach. I think that's Charlie, son of Al Kalmbach. Next to Charlie is Dave Morgan, unmistakable in his white hair. Next to Dave is Ted Rose, still on the staff of Kalmbach and still probably a student at the University of Illinois. I don't recognize the guy next to him in the fedora, but next to him, finally at the far right side, is the great Gil Reed, smiling and having a wonderful time as usual. And in the foreground, in front of all of them with the camera around his neck, is the company's Al Kalmbach, without whom any of this would be possible. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your patience tonight, and I hope you all enjoyed the presentation. I want to call out several people here. James Kieselberg, who's the executive director of the Grohmann Museum, for having the foresight to start the exhibit at the museum. Of course, this exhibit will continue to travel around the country. Lisa, for her wonderful help with everything. Gil Taylor, who's on our staff, archive staff, for helping me with some imagery. Scott Lotus, who I have to call out for doing a fabulous job on the text in the catalog for the Kalmbach Art Collection. I wrote the leading essay, but most of it's written by Scott, and his insights and his sense of detail about not only the art, but the railroad world that it depicted is really incredible. I'd like to thank Dan Hickey, the last CEO of Kalmbach Media before they went out of business, for agreeing, leading the board of directors to give us the paintings. Martha Lundeen, his longtime assistant and a good friend of mine. Lisa Schrader, art director of Classic Trains, who helped me with some of the imagery here. Cody Grivno, who also helped me with some images. He's on the model railroader staff. Tom Hoffman, still the librarian for Trains Magazine at Firecrown Media. And finally, Greg McDonald, who years ago did a series of special issues on the Hastings Morgans thing for us and made all new scans of all the pictures, and they're really great. And finally, I'd just like to make a plug here for the catalog, which is available from our website, $30 plus postage. It's a great book to have, and I really encourage you to think about getting a copy. So with that, thank you.
Oh, Kevin, I wasn't sure you were going to be able to follow up your initial talk from the Grohmann Museum at the opening, but you just did. That was
Good.
wonderful.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Sure, you're
Um,
welcome.
we have so many people just echoing how, excited that they were to be here. A wonderful presentation. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're
Um,
welcome.
it's just, yeah, it's wonderful. So we do have some questions that came in. Would you be up for some questions, Kevin?
Sure.
All right, here we go. Bill Schaefer said, Kevin, did you not tell me that you rescued Larry Lusser's pen and ink from the
Oh,
trash?
thanks, Billy. I'm glad you asked about that. Yes, it's true. I don't know if I mentioned that at the museum. I might have. I just forgot to mention it tonight. But yeah, I have to say, around 2005, Kalmbach was going through one of its occasional things all companies do, and that's get rid of stuff that nobody wants anymore. And one day I was in a back closet on the second floor, and there was some artwork in there. A lot of it was just incidental stuff that didn't matter, but in there was that original black and white illustration of the Mohawk, and it was being put aside to be either given away or thrown away. And I remember talking with our corporate art director about it, expressing surprise that this was going to be just cast off. My good buddy, Maureen Schimmel, I'm not calling her out for any negative reason. She was a wonderful colleague, but that's where the drawing was headed. And I said, well, can I have it? And she said, sure. So I rescued it. It's been here in my office here for, I don't know, 20, 22 years or whatever. And when the Kalmbach collection went over to the center, I thought this should go with it. So that's what happened.
Love it. Thank you. Thank you for the question too. And
Yeah.
of course, Kevin for saving that, of course. Trey McDowell just wanted to tell you thank you so much for this presentation and also your presentation at the Grohmann.
Good.
He really, really enjoyed both of them.
That was a lot of fun.
Bradley Scott is wondering, oh, well, where can people view the Kalmbach art collection? So do you want to tell Kevin?
Well, I'll get a little ahead of myself here, perhaps, although you can back me up on this, Lisa.
Sure.
Certainly our intent with everything we do is to take what we're collecting and what we're creating and push it to as large a national audience as we can. So, as you mentioned earlier, the Grohmann Museum has very graciously extended the exhibit here in Milwaukee. So you got a few more weeks here. You tell me, Lisa, I think I'm right. I mean, the plan in general anyway is to take this exhibit on the road. So, watch, as they say, watch your local listings.
Yep, we're working on it for sure.
And you might be able to tell us more. I'm not sure how we might be presenting this material on the website, but I'm sure a lot of it will be visible there as well.
We're working on all kinds of different avenues, so more to come.
Elron, you might know more about that. I don't know.
Well, and I think, Lisa, I think it's safe to say that the Grohmann's going to extend their exhibition of the art collection, which was going to end around August 19th, but now it's going to carry on for another month. So
Yeah.
I hope you don't mind me spoiling that.
No,
Oh,
of
no.
course. And another way to have the collection and see more of it is to get the catalog, because everything that's in the collection outside of some stuff that's not related to railroading is in that book, and it's beautifully produced. If you want a handsome, beautiful record of all the paintings, it's right there between soft covers, along with this great essay by Scott.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I agree. So we've had a couple of other people ask, let me just look here. Oh, we had some people guess about where the Gloff GP30 was. And they said Glenwood Canyon or perhaps Gore Canyon were some
Okay.
two guesses that came up. Also Helper, Utah was thrown out. So I don't know Finish
That
those.
makes sense.
Not
Well,
sure about helper, but
I'm not sure about Helper because there's that factory there. Was there a industrial facility of some kind in Helper, Elron? I don't remember that there was.
I don't recall anything like that. I think the cliffs that you see in that are shaped in the GP30 painting, they definitely evoke that Glenwood Canyon feel.
Yes. And unlike Royal Gorge, I don't think Royal Gorge has those electrical wire rock warning devices that they had in the painting. Not sure about
Right.
that.
But I'm not 100% sure either. But yeah, so
Anyway,
that'll be
thanks for the help.
our mission
Yeah.
to figure that out.
Yeah. Yeah, those are some good guesses, it sounds like, though.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Elron, did you have any questions?
I had one, Kevin. I was thinking about you mentioned with the Casey Jones article, there was that feeling that it wasn't going to take off and people weren't going to respond to it. And made me wonder, did you ever see much reader feedback in terms of the art itself? Art being used as a cover or inside the magazine? Did readers ever write you about the use of art versus photography, or was that just sort of accepted back then?
Well, it wasn't accepted back then so much because by that time in 2000, we had moved away from putting art on the cover. In fact,
Mm, yeah.
almost the entire time I was working at Kalmbach, which started in 1987, the basic advice we were getting as we got more and more active in the magazine industry was try not to put art on the cover. Art was a sales killer.
Mhm.
Photography sells magazines better than art. But in the case of this Casey Jones thing, I thought all those photographs were just kind of flat. And I just figured a piece of art would really bring it alive. And I felt particularly that Swartzley's approach, which was the non-rivet counter approach, which was high on emotion, not so high on detail, but certainly absolutely dead on in terms of proportion and angle, was the way to go. Whether or not we got any compliments on it, I don't remember. I'd have to go back and look at the letters column, but I can tell you that the issue sold better than the average April issue did. So I took that as partly a response to the cover and also partly to Pete Hansen's. You got to go back and read the story, man. It's a stem winder. He told an old story in a very fresh way.
I still have my issue, so I'm going to go back and reread it.
Good.
I definitely
Um,
will. Yeah.
I do have to say that John Swartzley was one of the 3 living artists who were
Right.
part of the exhibition. And
Mhm.
he and his wife did retire from Connecticut to Cedar City, Utah. And so he now has his studio there in Cedar City, Utah.
Ah,
And he was sad that he wasn't able to join us tonight, but looks forward to seeing this on YouTube. So shout out to John Swartzley. He's amazing.
a wonderful artist. Yep.
Yes. We have somebody who said, um,
I
you know,
I see.
about offering, should this art come out in prints so that people could have some of these prints available? What do you think about that, Kevin?
Well, gee, I don't know. I never really thought about that before. That's certainly up to the management and the board of the center. I don't know that we certainly do prints for special purposes at the conferences. I don't know that we've ever gotten in the business of making prints. I suppose it's worth discussing at some point.
I, I
I
think I would say at the moment, the best way to satisfy that craving is to buy the book
yeah,
because the
thank you.
reproduction is so beautiful in it. And
Right.
I mean, I have, and I've been there to see the Grohmann exhibition, but I still have paged through the book and really marveled at how beautifully it's reproduced.
It's possible, although my experience with railroad prints isn't very good. I bought a couple over the years, but they fade and I'm just not a big fan of them. But that's just me personally. That doesn't mean that other people involved in the center might not think it's a good idea.
Well
Yeah.
said, both Kevin and Elrond.
Diplomatic.
Very
Diplomatic, very good.
diplomatic PR evasion.
Very good. All right. Well, I think that's about all we have for tonight. Thank you again, Kevin. Just wonderful presentation, anecdotes, background. It was just wonderful. And we're so grateful for all of you joining us tonight. We've had such a big crowd, and it's wonderful to see so many people getting excited about railroad art, because I think it's such an important piece of railroad history and the story overall. So thank you again, Kevin, just beautifully done. And thank you to all for joining us. And we hope you all have a wonderful evening. A quick shout out that we will be having our next Zoom program on August 19th, and it will be interviewing the 2025 our photo competition winners, let me try speaking here, for 2025. And so that announcement will be taking place of the winners on August 1st, but then we will be interviewing them on Zoom on August 19th. So be looking for that registration to be coming out very, very soon. And we'll see you all then. Thank you again, Kevin, and I
Thanks
wish
again,
everybody
everybody.
a very nice evening.